Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what's an interesting phenomenon. It's quite hard to understand, I think. This assumes that we accept that government statistics and numbers are accurate, and I doubt they are, but let's run with it for a moment. Since President Trump has come into office, some 1.6 million illegal aliens have not come into the United States. So they've been refused entry, 1.6 million. And there's been something in the order of 2 million, depending on whose numbers you want to look at, or it's approaching 2 million of people illegals who've been deported. Now, this includes an estimated self-deporting, so the numbers maybe aren't 100% accurate, but nonetheless, so the amount of people in the United States has been reduced, if you like, in overall terms by somewhere in the region of 3.5 million plus. So this is surely going to feed through just the amount of deportations alone, assuming it's accurate. This is going to feed through into employment numbers. So you would think that many jobs, every new job that comes along, given the illegality of employing illegal aliens and so on, that every new job that comes along would be something that would go to local people in the US, locally born American citizens. Now, if that was the case, then you would see almost an explosion in employment, and yet that doesn't appear to be happening. In fact, employment numbers appear to be softening, and they've been, in my view at least, if not disappointing, well below what the expectations would be. Now, if all these 3.5 million people, or even a decent proportion of them, would have got work or are working, would have got jobs or were working, illegally, and straight away you think that would translate into over 1 million, at least over 1 million new jobs would come up almost straight away since these deportations began. But that hasn't happened. So the amount of evictions and deportations and all that has not translated into anywhere near the equivalent amount of jobs. So what conclusions can we draw? Well, we can assume that the government stats they're putting out, during the years of Biden, and Biden didn't know what was going on. His globalist handlers, was just all the job numbers were just all bullshit. And we can't rule that out, by the way. I suspect that they were certainly gilding the lily on that. But if there was no an explosion of new jobs being created, given that again the amount of deportations, then we can assume that these people simply weren't working. They were all drug dealers or prostitutes or something like that, and they weren't working at all, or they were working for some such under the table wages through internationally fraudulent controlled labour hire firms and things like that. So the jobs were all sham or bullshit, or they were slave labour wages, and that the people who are employing could afford 5 people for employing every one American, for example, employing someone on a legal basis. So if 5 workers go out, that only creates 5 illegal under the table fraudulent workers are deported, then that only creates 1 job for Americans, not 5 jobs. That's also quite a strong likelihood. The slave labor wages, people who are living 20 to a 1-bedroom apartment and that sort of thing. Now, you would also imagine that there'd be some sort of effect on real estate, that rents would fall in certain areas. There are claims that in areas that have had a lot of deportations, that the main street is like a ghost town and the shops have closed. Were all these shops illegal? Were all these shops just only made viable by illegal peasant slave labor, or what was going on here? There needs to be some sort of investigation as to what was going on in these places. If suddenly it's a ghost town and all the shops are empty, then what was going on before. There needs to be, I think, a thorough examination of this. So in spite of all these, so if we look at the natural, if we just look at the natural trend of jobs, new job creation, we look at the natural trend of jobs, and we look at the amount of people deported, and again, the amount of illegals not coming in who would have taken at least some of the jobs, then we're left wondering, well, hold on a minute, where have all the jobs gone? If people are too afraid to go to, illegals are too afraid to go to work, then surely that would create new jobs. So we're looking at really jobs. The jobs illegals were working in weren't jobs that either could pay, as in the business was not viable without slave labour, could pay or afford to pay the legal wage or the legal hourly rate. There would appear to be, certainly from what I can tell, is there's a shortfall of somewhere in the region of 150 to 170,000 jobs per month since President Trump came to office have just disappeared. Given that the rate of deportation all the deportations didn't happen on just one day, it's been gradual. So this is the extent of it. So somewhere 170, give or take, 170,000 jobs have just vanished from the American economy. Were all these slave labor jobs? Were they? I mean, what were they? When I've done a vast amount of business traveling, and one thing that always intrigued me in third world countries, if they didn't have, because they had a huge surplus of labor, but they had very little capital equipment. And I was watching. This is a community hall or something. I was watching this third world country, these people in a community hall, and the bricks, or they were just really bullshit mud bricks, but the bricks were brought along for building this community hall, and it was masses of labour. So they were passing the brick shoulder to shoulder, all these brown, and they were just passing the bricks one at a time to each other. There was someone would put the cement, which wasn't mixed very well, by the way, and then another person would put the brick on top, another person would sort of tamp it down, and very inefficiently, and they were falling over each other. Bricks were dropping off. Cement was being thrown in over the edge and so on. I mean, it was a chaotic scene, and but this was how. So the equivalent thing in Australia would have one or two bricklayers, and these guys had like 100, and it was chaotic, and they were doing a shit job, and they had no string line in the brickwork, so the brickwork sort of snaked and meandered around. The fucking thing would fall down in a high wind. But anyway, that was the. So were the jobs? Were those the sort of jobs that existed? Because in Australia, the employment numbers are softening at exactly the same time, and there's been no mass deportations here. In fact, it's the reverse. The government is big time ramping up mass migration from places like India. And guaranteeing a lot of these people jobs in the public service when they couldn't get jobs without affirmative action and DEI. They wouldn't have a chance. So that white people have been purposefully prevented from gaining employment just so they can employ these mass migrants that aren't needed or wanted or of no benefit to Australia at all. So this is so the numbers are softening in the US. Employment numbers are softening at the same time as it is in Britain, Australia, Canada, all over the place. So has the employment situation, has the new jobs created, and that's not got anything to do with mass deportations? Do there need to be much more deportations? Because effectively, if a million working illegals are deported from the US, that should create somewhere in the region of 1 million jobs. But it's created almost none. If you look at the trend line of new jobs that are typically created, if it's even created a few thousand jobs, that'd be it. That'd be the total. So clearly, mass deportation and the creation of working illegals and new jobs created, there's a huge disconnect and mismatch there. Now, certainly from what I see, and this is probably anecdotal more than actual, but But kids leaving college in the US who've got STEM degrees, computer science or whatever, they're really struggling to find jobs. This is straight white kids. Now, some of this would be because of affirmative action programs and DEI that disinclude them from employment. They'd rather employ the black lesbian with the affirmative action degree, but they're finding it really tough getting work. But they are in Australia as well and in Britain as well. So again, this is an international phenomenon that can't be an accident. I don't think this is organic. But employers in Australia and in the US are screaming they can't find enough low-cost grunt labour to just do on-site labouring on a construction site, for example, or to go mowing lawns or cleaning swimming pools or that sort of work, just straight out grunt labour. And they're complaining bitterly about this. They just can't find people. There's a civil engineering contract, decent-sized firm, that the CEO is constantly raging and raving that mass migration in Australia has to be ramped up even further because he just can't get the slave labour that he wants to do the grunt labour work on building sites. So there's a universal screaming for that. And there's also a universal demand for, again, the slave labour type workers to work in, say, take out food and, cleaning, coming to do contract toilet cleaning and all that sort of stuff. So this is pretty much all around the Western world at the same time. But again, I come back to the deportation of all those illegal aliens who a decent proportion of them must have had jobs of some sort. Again, other than drug dealing or something, that should have created a number of jobs, a decent number of jobs, even if it's a ratio of 1 to 4, where they've got 4 slave labour workers, but really they'd only employ 1 white guy, that sort of thing. That would still have done a big kickstart in jobs, but it hasn't. It appears to have, in economic terms, no effect. If anything, the effect has been to reduce the amount of, on a relative trend line basis, reduce the amount of employment. So what's going on here? Were we fed dodgy numbers to begin with? Again, were they all drug dealers or something like that? Or were they all sort of absolute bottom drawer slave labourers? So very few jobs are really created once they're gone. But their mere existence in the US meant that non-viable businesses could exist. And now those businesses are folding without the slave labour. So I would argue there needs to be a serious and detailed investigation here to see what was going on, because the basic sort of laws and rules of economics clearly are not applying here. So we're looking at something else was happening. What was happening? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.